Imagine stepping onto a stage in front of, I don't know, hundreds of expectant paying audience members.
Right, people who are waiting for jokes.
Exactly. They're waiting for punchlines, a routine, the whole thing. But instead, you walk up to the microphone, open a copy of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, and you just start reading.
Oh, wow. Just reading the book.
Out loud, chapter by chapter. And the audience, they start shifting around, then they start murmuring. Eventually, they are actively booing you, screaming for you to stop.
Which sounds like a nightmare for most performers.
Right. But for you, you consider this the absolute greatest triumph of your career.
That is just wild.
It is. And that was the daily life of the legendary, just wildly unpredictable comedian Andy Kaufman. But today on the Deep Dive, we are taking Kaufman's brand of, well, what you could call weaponized confusion, and we're applying it to a completely different arena.
A very different arena, yeah.
We are looking at a really profound set of ideas from our sources today that argues Kaufman's entire ethos is actually the ultimate survival blueprint for a teenager living in a boarding house.
Yeah, so we are taking this extreme historical example of a performer who built a legacy on basically refusing to conform, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we are mapping that directly onto one of the most structurally conformist, pressure-filled environments imaginable. Because a boarding house is this intense communal setting.
It really is.
And the psychological dynamics at play there are actually remarkably similar to the dynamics between a performer and a demanding audience.
Which is exactly what our mission for you today is all about. We want to explore why being unapologetically different is not just, a nice idealistic concept, but is genuinely the ultimate superpower when you are navigating a diverse community.
Totally.
Okay, let's unpack this because we have to start with the environment itself, the boarding house.
Right, the setting.
Yeah, you have this incredibly dense, high-stakes social ecosystem. You're bringing together like the loud, hyper-confident individuals, the quiet, methodical thinkers, the elite athletes, the intensely creative artists.
The pragmatic academics, too.
Exactly. And a massive contingent of people who are still entirely unsure of where they even fit in.
And when you place that many diverse personalities into a shared, really enclosed environment with rigid routines, you immediately trigger this profound evolutionary response.
Wait, really? Like an actual biological response?
Oh, absolutely. Because human beings, and particularly adolescents, are deeply wired for in-group and out-group dynamics.
Right, right.
During our formative years, the brain's amygdala is hyper-vigilant to the threat of social ostracization.
Because throughout human history, being separated from the tribe meant, well, it meant literal danger.
Exactly. Literal danger. So in a dense communal environment like a boarding house, the adolescent brain perceives standing out, being different, as a massive existential threat.
That makes so much sense.
The overwhelming psychological pressure is just to achieve social homeostasis. Keep the peace. Blend in.
Which perfectly explains that immediate, almost involuntary instinct to adopt what we could call the chameleon tactic.
Yes, the chameleon tactic.
You just scan the room, figure out the dominant social currency, and you aggressively assimilate. I mean, I remember my own version of this in high school.
Oh, yeah. What was yours?
Oh, man. There was this specific, incredibly rigid brand of canvas jacket that all the popular kids wore.
I think I know exactly the type of jacket you're talking about.
They were awful. They were stiff, they were uncomfortable, and they offered absolutely zero insulation.
Right. Totally useless as actual coats.
But I spent an entire autumn sweating in one of those terrible jackets, completely miserable just because it acted as camouflage.
Yep. Because if you wear the uniform, you claim to love the exact same music, you aggressively hide the obscure, weird things you actually care about, you become invisible.
Exactly. And if you are invisible, you can't be targeted.
The problem, though, is that performative assimilation is a highly effective short-term survival strategy, but it comes at a massive psychological cost.
Right, because you're hiding who you actually are.
Yeah, it actively erodes true confidence. I mean, we have a tendency in society to conflate confidence with social dominance, right?
For sure. Like whoever's talking the most.
Right, we think the confident person is the loudest in the room or the one dictating the group's behavior. But from a psychological standpoint, that is often just masking.
Interesting. So how is true confidence defined here based on our sources?
True confidence is defined entirely differently. It's a quiet, internalized state. It is simply the ability to hold your ground and say, this is who I am, these are my genuine interests, and that is fundamentally okay.
But practically speaking, I mean, if the evolutionary instinct in that high-stakes ecosystem is to blend in,
Right.
What actually happens when you intentionally refuse to put on the chameleon suit?
Well, that brings us right back to our ultimate historical case study,
Andy Kaufman.
Andy Kaufman. Because he didn't just casually avoid conformity, he aggressively dismantled it.
Yeah, Kaufman's entire career was basically an exercise in disrupting expectations. Beyond the Great Gatsby readings, think about his famous Mighty Mouse routine.
Oh, that is a perfect example.
Right. He would walk out on national television, stand completely motionless next to a record player while the theme song played, just deadpan,
Just staring at the audience.
staring at them for agonizingly long stretches of time, and then he'd only animate to enthusiastically lip sync the single chorus line, "Here I come to save the day."
And then instantly revert back to standing completely still.
It's so good. But the audience was entirely bewildered. They expected a comedian to deliver a setup and a punchline.
And he refused to provide either.
But wait, I have to push back on this because we really need to ground this in reality for the listener.
Okay, fair enough.
Kaufman was a famous, eccentric performer. He had a literal stage, a microphone, television cameras. The audience was separated from him by a physical boundary.
That's true.
So how does deliberately confusing an audience translate to, like, a 15-year-old just trying to survive breakfast in the dining hall without getting weird looks?
I see what you mean.
I mean, if a teenager stands by the toaster, totally deadpan, waiting for the pop to scream, "Here I come to save the day," they aren't going to be hailed as a comedic genius.
No, definitely not.
They're going to get socially exiled or bullied into oblivion. So how does this avant-garde approach actually survive the ruthless hierarchy of high school?
What's fascinating here is the vital distinction between the external action and the internal intention.
Okay, explain that.
The goal isn't to mimic Andy Kaufman's specific bizarre behaviors just to cause chaos in the dining hall.
Right, please don't yell at the toaster.
Exactly. The lesson lies in the underlying mechanism of what Kaufman was doing. He was fundamentally rejecting the expectation to perform for others.
Oh, I see.
The audience demanded a specific type of performance, traditional jokes, and he opted out of that performative arms race entirely.
So for the student in the boarding house, the performance they are opting out of is the desperate attempt to act like everyone else.
Precisely. The confusion of the audience isn't the goal. It is merely a secondary byproduct of choosing radical authenticity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When a classmate looks at you weirdly because you are reading an obscure philosophy book instead of scrolling on your phone, or because you are passionately sketching in a notebook during free time, you aren't actively trying to confuse them.
Right, you're just doing your thing.
They are confused simply because you are refusing to read from the established social script. You are breaking the contract of the chameleon suit.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because that refusal to follow the script introduces a major dilemma.
What's that?
Well, if everyone in a boarding house suddenly drops the chameleon suit and acts entirely as an individual with their own obscure interests and unique behaviors, wouldn't the community just shatter?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah, you would assume you need that conformity to maintain order. But the underlying argument from our sources is the exact opposite. Individuality isn't a threat to the community. It is the fundamental glue that holds it together.
It feels counterintuitive, but it aligns perfectly with the sociological frameworks of robust communities. A healthy ecosystem relies on cognitive diversity.
Cognitive diversity.
Right. If you have a boarding house composed entirely of elite athletes who all think the exact same way, value the exact same things, and approach problems with the exact same mindset, you do not have a community.
You have a monolithic sports team.
Exactly. And the structure becomes incredibly fragile because it lacks varied perspectives.
Think of it less like a standardized factory line and more like a complex jazz ensemble.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. If every single musician on the stage decides the trumpet is the most popular dominant instrument and they all just play the exact same trumpet melody at the exact same volume, you don't get music.
You get an unbearable, deafening wall of noise.
Exactly. To elevate it to a masterpiece, you desperately need the dissonance. You need the deep rhythm of the bass, the unpredictable syncopation of the snare drum, the quiet intricacies of the piano.
Yeah.
The friction between those different elements, the contrasting talents, is what creates the harmony.
And that social friction is absolutely required for true community cohesion. I mean, the gamer brings a highly analytical, strategic lens to problem solving.
Right.
The artist introduces a necessary aesthetic and emotional intelligence. The quiet thinker provides grounded reflection when the loud, confident personalities escalate a situation.
They actively challenge each other.
Yes, they force each other to view the world through different paradigms, and as a result, the collective intelligence and empathy of the entire house increases exponentially.
Wow.
But to achieve that, we have to completely redefine the concept of belonging. Because in an adolescent mindset, belonging is almost always defined as fitting in.
Being the same as everyone else.
Exactly. But the reality is that belonging does not mean becoming the same as everyone else. It means being accepted precisely because of your differences.
Which is a beautiful theory. The jazz ensemble needs all the unique instruments, but let's be real about the execution here.
Right, the hard part.
Understanding that cognitive diversity is good requires intellectual maturity. Putting it into practice, actually being the kid playing the unpredictable snare drum while everyone else is blaring on the trumpet, that requires immense, terrifying vulnerability.
He really does.
It takes massive courage to openly love a weird band, to try a niche extracurricular activity, or to actively refuse to join the crowd when they are collectively teasing someone.
That vulnerability cannot be overstated. Opting out of the performative arms race is a daily, active choice. It is an exercise in exposing your genuine self to potential critique without the armor of the chameleon suit.
But that brings up a massive paradox for the listener.
Okay, what is it?
If you are listening to this right now, especially if you are young, you might be thinking, that sounds great, but how can I be unapologetically myself when I'm 15 and myself is basically still under construction?
Yeah, that's a very real fear.
How do you project radical authenticity when you don't even know what you are genuinely good at, what your core values are, or where you actually fit into the world?
This raises an important question, and it addresses the exact anxiety that paralyzes so many individuals in communal settings. The fear of presenting an unfinished identity.
An unfinished identity. I love that phrasing.
The profound reassurance embedded in this framework is the normalization of the still becoming phase.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Identity is not a fixed destination that you are expected to have successfully reached by the time you unpack your bags in the boarding house.
Right.
It is a fluid, active, and often messy process of experimentation.
It's like demanding a scientist publish a groundbreaking paper before they've even been allowed to turn on the Bunsen burner.
Perfect comparison, yes.
The boarding house isn't the final exam. It is the laboratory. It is this highly structured, enclosed environment where you are fundamentally safe to run social experiments on yourself.
Exactly. You decide to join the debate team for a semester, realize you absolutely hate public speaking, and you pivot to learning the guitar. You are testing hypotheses about your own personality.
And if we look back at Andy Kaufman, his entire trajectory mirrors that experimental mindset. He didn't lock into one static persona.
No, he was always shifting.
He constantly explored, evolved, and changed the parameters of his own identity. He introduced characters like Tony Clifton, this abrasive lounge singer, just to see how the dynamics would shift.
Right, just testing the waters.
And the boarding house offers a scaled-down, supported sandbox for that exact type of exploration. It isn't about having a fully formed, marketable brand identity as a teenager.
No, not at all.
It is about the courage to try, fail, discover, and evolve.
But for that laboratory to actually function, for it to remain a safe place to run those vulnerable social experiments, we have to look at the other side of the equation.
Which is what?
Well, individuality is never a solo endeavor. It requires a reciprocal ecosystem.
Ah.
You cannot sit in your room demanding that everyone respect your deeply obscure hobby of collecting vintage typewriters, while you simultaneously mock the kid down the hall for their obsession with a fantasy video game.
Right. The creation of culture is a two-way street. The mechanics of radical authenticity demand that if you want the freedom to step out of the chameleon suit, you must actively grant that exact same freedom to the people around you.
Exactly. Being comfortable with your own individuality is inextricably linked to letting others be themselves without the threat of judgment.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, navigating this environment on a random Tuesday evening?
It means a lot of responsibility, actually.
It does. It means recognizing that you are not just a passive resident trapped inside a social terrarium. You are the active architect of the culture itself.
Yes, culture isn't handed down by the administration. It's built through micro-interactions.
Well, like what?
It's the decision not to laugh at a joke made at the quiet kid's expense. It's the choice to ask genuine questions when a roommate brings up a cultural tradition you've never heard of, instead of dismissing it as weird.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, those micro-interactions are the exact formula for dismantling the pressure cooker.
They really are. When you celebrate uniqueness rather than policing it, you remove the threat from the amygdala.
Right, the brain calms down.
Students no longer feel the evolutionary panic to assimilate. The practical, measurable outcomes of this reciprocal respect are staggering.
Because when the environment feels safe, baseline anxiety plummets. Creativity naturally increases because the fear of failure is removed. And most importantly, the nature of relationships fundamentally shifts.
Yeah, that's huge.
Because if you make all your friends while you are tightly zipped up inside that chameleon suit, you haven't actually made any friends.
Wow.
They aren't connecting with you. They are connecting with the camouflage. You might be safe from being targeted, but you are experiencing profound, agonizing isolation because nobody actually knows who you are.
That's a heavy realization.
It is. Genuine connection absolutely requires the friction of genuine identity.
It is the difference between a commodified identity, one that is packaged specifically to be consumed and approved by the group, and an authentic existence.
Right.
When the culture allows for authentic existence, the friendships forged in that boarding house are no longer based on mere proximity or shared survival tactics. They are based on mutual respect for cognitive diversity.
It is genuinely wild to realize that applying the philosophy of a chaotic, disruptive 1970s comedian actually yields the most stable, supportive, and emotionally intelligent communal environment possible.
I know, it's such a twist.
It completely flips the established script on what it means to be successful in a group setting.
It requires a paradigm shift, moving away from the belief that blending in equates to thriving. Kaufman's legacy proves that performing for the sole purpose of meeting others' expectations is just a hollow victory.
So, as we pull all these threads together, let's lock in the core takeaways. First, if you are currently living in a boarding house or really any tight-knit community, understand that it's not a factory designed to churn out identical, easily digestible copies of a single ideal student.
Right.
You are not there to be a clone. It is a laboratory designed for the messy, highly experimental work of figuring out exactly what your unique instruments are and how you can add them to the jazz ensemble.
And for anyone listening who is currently feeling the crushing weight of that social pressure cooker, anyone who feels exhausted by the performative arms race, there is a profound and comforting promise hidden in this framework.
I love this part.
The very things that make you feel awkwardly different right now, the niche interests and the unique perspectives that feel like liabilities in a high school dining hall, will inevitably become the exact things that make you indispensable later in life.
Because the adult world, the world of actual innovation and progress, does not reward chameleons.
No, it doesn't.
Corporate echo chambers filled with people who all think the exact same way do not solve complex problems. The world actively rewards originality. It desperately needs the dissonance and the unique friction that only comes from people who refuse to blend in.
The world does not need more standardized individuals. It needs people with the courage to tolerate the initial confusion of the crowd while they figure out exactly who they are.
Which brings us full circle. We started with the tension between a comedian getting booed for reading a classic novel and a teenager just trying to survive breakfast.
Right.
It turns out the blueprint for both is radical authenticity. Opt out of the performance. Drop the camouflage. So, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over today as you navigate your own community.
Okay, let's hear it.
If that environment is truly the ultimate safe laboratory for experimenting with your identity, what is one weird, deeply obscure, or totally different interest that you're currently hiding from the crowd, that might actually be the keystone to your greatest success in the adult world.
It is a question that demands some serious self-reflection.
Time to step into the laboratory. Stop performing for the crowd and start playing your own instrument. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.